So as usual, these lineups are optimized for FanDuel 50-50 cash matchup. So finish in the top half, win your money back. And it is for the Sunday and Monday slate. So this week that actually rolls out 3 Saturday games, but that's all right. That still gives us 13 games to choose from. So some water first. I don't need a drum roll. I don't need it. Although it did feel kind of nice. Good to feel appreciated. Anyway, we'll start off at quarterback as usual. For my quarterback this week at $7,700, I'm going with Matty Ice, Matt Ryan, who is the 9th price quarterback this week. He gets a Jacksonville Jaguars defense that, as we mentioned earlier, has been terrible during the latter half of this year. Other than that second half against Oakland, they've just been straight garbage. So Matt Ryan, in my opinion, has a better matchup than any quarterback priced ahead of him. He's also got an extremely high floor if he does not turn the ball over, which works out that he plays Jacksonville this week, who ranks 25th in the league in interceptions. So he's consistently right around that 300-yard mark. I think there's been 4 games that he's been under that, one of which he was around 278. And last week was one of them. He only had 210 yards, but he still was able to get 19 points against San Francisco's defense. Love Matt Ryan this week at $7,700. At running back 1, I'm going to go with Chris Carson, just like I did last week, and for similar reasons. He's the workhorse now there with Rashad Penny out. Last week he had 24 carries, was able to turn that into 26.2 points. This week he gets a Cardinals defense that isn't quite as bad as that Carolina defense was that he played last week, but they are still bottom 10 in the league against fantasy running backs. So Carson's volume and virtual monopoly in terms of goal line touches make him one of the highest ceiling, high ceiling, high floor combos, one of the best ones that there is this week. I think he could be the 2nd or 3rd running back. He's priced as the number 6 running back. Give you perspective, $2,600 less than Christian McCaffrey. Okay, running back 2, I'm going to go with Devontae Freeman again. I know he was my flex play last week, but he had such a good week, I'm upgrading him to my RB2. And he's still just too cheap this week considering the matchup. So since week 2, in games that he has played against teams not named the New Orleans Saints or the San Francisco 49ers, he's scored single digits only once. So he has been a very consistent fantasy option. And as I mentioned with Matt Ryan, Devontae Freeman being on the same team also gets that same Jags defense, who have been the 2nd worst defense against fantasy running backs and are tied for the 2nd most touchdowns allowed to the position. So really love Devontae Freeman at $6,200. Wide receiver 1, I'm going to go with the best wide receiver in fantasy football, Michael Thomas. And basically, I could afford to fit him into my lineup and still like my other players, so I got to go with him. He has just been absolutely ridiculous this season, scoring 20-plus in 6 of the past 7 weeks and scoring single digits only once all season. He also gets a Titans team that has struggled against top wide receivers the past week. In 5 out of the past 7 games, they have allowed a number 1 to go over 100 yards. Those guys have been Mike Evans, DJ Moore, Tyreek Hill, Zach Pascal, and DeAndre Hopkins. So I have much faith that Michael Thomas is going to be able to do that, and you'll be able to find value in that $9,000 price tag. Wide receiver 2, another duplicate from last week in Julio Jones. As you can tell, I really like these Falcons guys against the Jags this week.
You playing the Falcons or what?
I am playing the Falcons heavy. I think this Jags team is broken, and I think just the fact that Tom Coughlin's gone now, they have clearly given up for the year. So I knew he was too cheap last week, and he showed it by scoring 2 touchdowns and getting targeted 20 times. And I still think at $8,000, he is a steal. So Jags defense looks broken. Matt Ryan is missing a couple weapons, so he's going to feed Julio often. And I also feel like this game as a whole, it's the last game in the Dome for Atlanta of the season. I think they're trying to fight for Dan Quinn to maybe keep his job. I think Atlanta as a whole absolutely goes off this week offensively. That's why I like all these Atlanta players. Wide receiver 3 at $6,300. I'm going to stay in that same game, but go the opposite sideline to the Jaguars. I'm going with DJ Chark at $6,300. So I know Atlanta has had their moments on defense recently, but it's still a really flawed unit. And like I said, I expect Atlanta to score a lot, so I feel like Jacksonville's going to have to play catch-up. Chark was out last week when Minshew struggled for that first half of the game. But when Minshew was cooking, it was because of his connection with Chark. So I'm looking for him to try and target him a lot like he did those first couple weeks when he was a starter. Like, it wasn't that long ago, guys, that we were talking about DJ Chark as a wide receiver 1, and he's priced as wide receiver 25 this week. So huge upside, and I think the connection he has with Minshew will get him enough volume to easily be worth that $6,300. At tight end, I'm going with Seattle's Jacob Hollister, who's a really underwhelming pick this week, but he makes the most of the targets that he gets from Russell Wilson. And he gets the Cardinals, who, as we've mentioned in this segment before, are historically bad against tight ends. So if I can play a tight end against the Cardinals, I will. And that's exactly what I'm doing this week with Jacob Hollister. At my flex position, I'm going with the guy that I talked about, member of your Eagles, Boston Scott at $5,400. I had to save some money here so I could afford both Michael Thomas and Julio Jones this week. But I think Boston Scott's a great play. So thanks to about 70% of that Eagles roster getting injured, Boston Scott has gained some fantasy relevance. Obviously, he came down last week from that stellar performance against the Giants when he had 21 points, but he did still manage to get 10 points last week. So Eagles obviously lacking weapons, and Scott seems to have filled that like Darren Sproles-esque role.
I was just going to chip in on that.
Mostly as a receiver in the passing game. Had 6 targets 2 weeks ago, or 6 catches 2 weeks ago, 7 catches last week. And I do get that Miles Sanders is the workhorse back right now in terms of getting the ball in backfield. But Scott still got a few touches the past couple weeks, and that receiving upside in the FanDuel PPR format really is intriguing, particularly at this price tag. Now,
yeah, the RB's got more targets than any group outside, like the receivers and tight ends.
Absolutely. It was only Ward was the only wide receiver that caught a ball, and obviously you can't go to Zach Ertz on every play.
Right.
Now, what I will say is that if Jordan Howard plays, I'm going to lean off of Boston Scott here because then I think Miles Sanders kind of fills that role. And if Howard does play, I will make the recommendation. I would play Taylor Gabriel, who looks like he's going to return from a concussion this week for the Bears and was the number 2 option there before he went down. And Mitch Trubisky is cooking a little bit. Additionally, I wanted to also mention in that same note, with DJ Chark, there's a chance that he might not play as well or might be a little bit more banged up than we thought. If he does not play, you can plug in Tyler Boyd at that same price point. Want to make sure I give you guys backups with these injured guys. And then lastly, my defense, I'm going with the Carolina Panthers at $3,500. They played the Indianapolis Colts this week, who are really struggling offensively. Mack and Hilton are still kind of banged up, and they're out of the playoff hopes. So we'll see how much run they get this week. And surprisingly, they're the 4th cheapest defense, even though they do have that matchup. And they also rank 6th in interceptions this year, 10th overall in turnovers, and are tied for 1st in sacks, all things that give you fantasy points. So really surprising. I'm jumping on the Panthers at $3,500 this week. I think they could outperform their value hugely. So in summary, at quarterback, I'm going with Matt Ryan. For my running backs, I'm going with Chris Carson and Devontae Freeman. For my wide receivers, give me Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, and DJ Chark. At tight end, I'm going to go with Jacob Hollister. For my flex, give me some Boston Scott, that nobody on the Philadelphia Eagles. And for my defense, I'm rolling with the Carolina Panthers.